doing well. I want to thank you all for joining us for part one of our three-part series on Let's Talk About SCI and Intimacy. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Julie, and I'm one of the peer program coordinators with Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. And Lubna, whom I don't think you can see, is my co-host, so she's helping out, and she is the manager of our peer program. So there's just a few things before we get started I want to let you know. So everybody upon entry and throughout the presentation will be muted, just so that cuts down on the background noise. Also, we are recording this presentation, so if you do not wish to be seen, please ensure that your video is turned off. There will be a question and answer session after the presentation, but please feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation if you've got questions, and we will get to them at the end. So as for our presenters, we've got Wallace and Melanie with us. Just to let you know a little bit about them. So Wallace, who is also known as Randy, has a Master of Social Work degree and is a registered social worker. He is currently working as a clinical research assistant with a focus on spinal cord injury and other acquired neurological disorders. As a person with a T6 complete spinal cord injury, Wallace lives his life to the fullest. And his lovely wife, Melanie, she has a Bachelor of Arts degree with a double major in English and Women's Studies. She worked as a human resources professional for over 15 years, holding a CHRL designation until 2020, when she retired from the field. Melanie is currently working on expanding her knowledge of spinal cord injury and the spinal cord injury community, fulfilling her passion for working with people and making connections. So Melanie and Wallace, I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Awesome, thank you very much. Welcome everybody to our home. So it's like having company.
That's right.
Over. So yeah, as Julie said, this is part one of a three-part series. We are, I guess, referred to as an interabled couple. Julie provided a great bio, so we don't really need to go into any more detail than that. But if you want to know a little bit more information about us, you can go to our website, which is t6talk.com. Tonight we're going to talk about myths and misconceptions. So, you'll notice every once in a while, Melanie giving me hand gestures and stuff, because when it comes to talking about sexuality and spinal cord injury and intimacy, and I can go on forever about it. So to kind of keep you wrangled in so that we only have the half an hour of us having our little conversation here, we'd really like to invite you to have a larger conversation with us afterwards.
So having the notes, it's kind of like herding cats.
Yeah,
so just
squirrels in my head,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah.
So we with the myths and misconceptions, I'm sure a lot of them that we will talk about this evening are ones that you are very familiar with. We still find it very important to address them because with myths and misconceptions is they very much become part of how we develop our understanding of the world and ourselves. And because spinal cord injuries are an acquired injury, a lot of the kind of the myths and misconceptions that you held prior to your injuries, you're going to carry with you over to post-injury. And it's a matter of what we want to do is identify some of these myths and misconceptions and dispel them, and also talk about some of how harmful they can be for that sense of self and the understanding of your world.
Mm-hmm.
So
So thanks everybody for coming this evening. Oh, I see Phil there. Hi, Phil. We aim to be inclusive. We hope that what we have to say tonight resonates with you. What we're going to be sharing is our lived experience. So we're certainly not speaking on behalf of your experience. We are always looking for greater diversity by interviewing or speaking with people in the spinal cord injury community. In particular, we're looking for BIPOC and LGBTQ2+ voices as well. And as well, we're talking tonight as a couple. It would be great to hear from singles as well to get that perspective. So either we can make some connections tonight, or certainly afterwards through our website, we would love to hear from you.
As I said, I just want to reiterate the point that we are going to present talk for 20, 30 minutes. And then rather than just have a question answer period at the end, which is a big part of it, we would like to open things up to have an actual conversation if at all possible. So afterwards, if you have any questions, by all means, if you want to put them in the chat box because you want to leave your mics off and you want to remain anonymous, please enter them in the chat box, or afterwards, raise your hand and we'll answer it or get to any questions or input that you might have.
And I think we're looking to talk closer to 30 to 40 minutes,
Yeah,
right? And then have the last half. But I know that Julie asked us if we would mind going over, and we have no problem with going over too. So
yeah, if people want to stick around a little bit longer. So what I'd like to start with is I'm going to pose a question to everybody. And that question is, have you ever had experience where you've been treated differently regarding sex or sexuality because you have a spinal cord injury or because you are intimately involved with someone who has an STI? And so we'll circle back to that during the discussion, that we're hoping that asking that question up front and through our conversation, is something that we can further explore during our conversation piece.
So Wallace, for clarification, I think we should look at some definitions to start, because I think there's a lot of terms we're going to be using that through our own experience, people have a different view on it. So
Right.
I think that we need to clearly define how we're going to be using those terms this evening, just for clarification. So let's start by talking about the term myths.
Okay.
How are we going to use that tonight?
Looking at myths, myths and stereotypes are very similar to one another. And what there were very widely held beliefs that are fixed and often oversimplified. And there are opinions about a particular group that is often unfair or untrue. They are born out of the assumption that, what do I got here? That we can group people together and ignore inherent complexities of each group. So basically it's like taking, that square peg and putting it in a round hole, or what they call pigeonholing people, putting everybody into the same category. They can sometimes appear complementary, but really at the core, they're offensive and quite often dangerous. So basically, to simplify, stereotypes is more the macro. It's what society believes. It's the larger perspective on things.
So then, the opposite of that, then what would misconceptions be?
Again, to simplify, misconceptions are essentially your owning of what the myths are. So there are opinions that you hold that are incorrect, and they just come from faulty thinking and misunderstandings. And so myths are what society tells us, and misconceptions are how we take those myths and we own them for ourselves.
So would that be like self-talk, like the self-talk we have?
Yeah, very much like that. Yeah.
Okay. So it seems to me too that myths and misconceptions then kind of feed one another and kind of create this loop that it's hard to maybe break out of sometimes too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they come, what you believe feeds what society tells us, and quite often those things come from decades back, like centuries back. Like they are just very widely held beliefs that get reinforced by individual thinking.
So what would an example, just a quick example of that be?
Okay, so an example of a myth would be all people with spinal cord injuries are unable to have sex and are not at all interested in sex. So that would be the widely held myth. And then the misconception would be, because I can't have sex like I had before, then I'm unable to have sex. It's not going to be something I'm capable of doing. So it's taking the larger belief and then owning it for yourself.
Okay. So when we think about sexuality, how would you define sexuality for the purpose of our discussion this evening?
Now, I want to make sure that I get this absolutely right, because there's so many ways of defining sexuality. So sexuality is who you are and how you see yourself. It is a culmination of all the parts that make you you. Okay, they encompass your gender identity, your sexual self-esteem, your self-image, your body image, your sexual expression, and your lived experience. Your sexuality is not the same as anyone else's, and there could be similarities or overlap but your sexuality is unique to you.
So that makes myths even more problematic then, doesn't it? Because it's limiting, narrow, and harmful. They negate what's innately complex and fluid, right? So for the purpose of this discussion this evening, how would you define sex?
Simply put, sex is how you express your sexuality.
Okay.
It's the physical act. And when we talk about intimacy and sex, it can include a wide range of things, anywhere from hugging, kissing, snuggling, masturbation, penetration, orgasm, either traditional or other, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. The use of toys and or fetishes, which are defined as sexual fixation on a specific object or act, or kinks, which are alternative sexual interests, including such things as BDSM.
And all of those things are things that we can do with ourselves. So solo or with a partner or in a team, providing it's consensual adults.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Okay, so sexuality is how you see yourself, and sex is how you express yourself. So just to kind of simplify
Absolutely.
for the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I lost my train of thought. More traditional and rigid views. The more rigid and traditional the views that we hold, the more difficulty we're going to have when it comes to dispelling the myths and being able to adjust to your sexuality post-injury.
So you're talking about what you carry forward.
That's
then. Is
right.
that what you're talking about? So
Yeah.
the more narrow or rigid or traditional the views are then it makes it tricky.
That's right. There's actually a lot of research that looks at that. Basically, it's shown that the quicker you are to kind of let go of a lot of the traditional, a lot of well, for example, what ought to be, and that very specifically stated, it is the defining sex as penis and vagina penetration.
So very heterosexual.
So very
as well.
heterosexual, and it's also, when you take a look at what's out there, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to agree with this, that if you've done any kind of research or Google searches even, and to take a look at what's available regarding sexuality and sex and intimacy, it's very male centered, it's very male dominated, it's very penis centric. So it focuses on, again, that traditional sense of what sex is.
So how are these things influenced?
Well, media, family views, even messages that you get from friends. But a large part of it is, again, through the myths and through the understandings of what is considered normal, what is considered the way things, as you said, should be.
Or ought to be.
Or ought to
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
And my life experience tells me that often it's not about what is said, but what's not said. Right. So I can remember, and I hate to say that it was 30 years ago, but 30 years ago, being in a lecture hall, and I think it was a women's studies course, because we were talking about masturbation, and I'm guessing it wasn't geology. So I can remember the teacher asking, or the professor asking for people to call out terminology for male masturbation. And very quickly, the whole board was filled with terminology. And then she turned to the group of us and said, okay, so how about terminology for female masturbation? And I think there was a couple, like jilling off or something like that was brought up, but really there wasn't a lot there, right? So I think the idea, or what's inferred there, is that women don't masturbate, because if we don't name it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
So what's that all about? And I'm sure. And sorry, go ahead.
I'll say, and too, like what I said about the research not looking primarily at male sexuality. It shows too, or it goes under the assumption that women aren't as sexual as men.
And they're not interested.
They're not
as interested, that somehow men are more sexual. Yeah, for sure. And I know that the terminology for masturbation, I'm sure that's increased over the years. And now that people are more openly exploring gender and rejecting some of the rigid terms, and traditional language that's been used. We're looking for more expansive and fluid language, right? Because people are realizing that they just don't fit into these tight little containers, that there's spillover. And so there needs to be more fluid language around that.
And a lot more flexibility as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we think about the power of adaptation, I know that with, we think of it from a business point of view, a lot of businesses reject statements like, well, we're not going to do that because we've always done it this way, or we, you know, there's the lack of understanding that we need to be able to adapt, right? So we should be applying this to the outdated views when it comes to sex and sexuality as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people fear what's different.
Yeah.
And that's not to say too, when we say about traditional and breaking away from the traditional, I mean, if that's what people are interested in, and if that is what really, you know, gets them off and floats their boat, then that's great. But it's when doing that is no longer possible, so therefore you think that it's kind of the end, that there's no longer any sex. It's a matter of being flexible and open to new opportunities. And
even reflecting to the pre that maybe it wasn't a fully satisfying sex life then either, because you weren't being really honest with yourself about what it is that feels good, because it's really hard to have those conversations and to be upfront and honest about it. You know, it's there's so much shame that's wrapped around sex and sexuality that it freezes us. And in really there's so much opportunity for fulfillment by opening up those and taking those risks and being vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Actually, I've got her article right down here. There was a recent article or a study that was done, and I forgot her name, so I want to read it out to you. What's it there? Kath Nelson. Anyway, it was a 2020 research project that interviewed a bunch of men regarding their sexuality, and one of their findings was that the sooner individuals were able to accept being flexible, to accept being able to break away from what they traditionally knew as being normal, then the sooner that happened, then the sooner the overall adjustment regarding their spinal cord injury was affected. It improved, and not just with sex and sexuality, but with all of it, because sex and sexuality or sex and intimacy is such an integral part of who we are.
And I think that the study also, they had different number of years post-injury, and the farther out somebody was, the more fulfilled they were, because they had more time to kind of.
That's right. And these men found that their sex life post-injury was actually more fulfilling than it was pre.
How about the myth that people with an SCI are asexual?
Well, false. Depending on how you define asexual. I think it's unfair to call it that. I think, and we're using that myth specifically and stating it that way because a lot of research and information looks at myths and misconceptions, states that as being one of them. But I mean, asexuality is a form of sexuality, and
how somebody might identify.
That's right. So some people may have been asexual prior to the spinal cord injury and would continue to be asexual afterwards.
I think people are confusing asexuality with celibacy and abstinence too.
Right.
So I think that
that's
part of it.
And
right?
so, I mean, but if you look at it as a myth that people with spinal cord injury are no longer sexual beings, again, it's completely false.
So I mean, what should the takeaway be
for
that myth when we're thinking about that myth?
Oh, it's again, if you are a sexual person prior to the injury, that's going to continue after the injury. The spinal cord injury does not take that away. You are just as much a sexual being afterwards as you were prior to. So the thought that as soon as you have a spinal cord injury, it eliminates all of that is completely false.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is a call out to anybody in the audience who might identify as asexual, or if you happen to know somebody in your group of friends or family that we would love to hear from you, whether it's tonight or later through our website, so that we can, again, as we say, increase the diversity of the voices that are out there, right?
Yep.
Wallace, have you ever had any personal experience with somebody questioning your ability to have sex?
Yes. And when we were first talking about this, and I was trying to remember there have been numerous examples, but one that hits me right away every time was not only a matter of somebody questioning my ability to have sex, but was also questioning, or was also interfering with boundary issues. I was at a grape and wine festival, and I was up at a table ordering wine, and I had a woman come up to me, and her exact words were, can you still fuck? And it was crazy. I couldn't, I was so embarrassed because there were so many people around. And I mean, would she come up and say that to somebody if I was up standing? Not likely. And then implied within that statement is, well, you must not be able to. There was this, it was a terrible experience.
Or even the challenge that if you can, that maybe it was an invitation, some crass invitation, right?
I don't know. It was just,
it clearly illustrates, I think, and I think it's especially with visible disabilities where personal boundaries are just decimated.
Yeah.
So another shout out would be for people to share their experiences with their personal boundaries being disrespected. I think that's a really important subject to talk about.
Yeah.
It's almost like there needs to be some sort of book on etiquette on, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I think there's something should be added in terms of etiquette, even if it's in school curriculums or something, to how to deal appropriately with stuff like that.
Well, I think if a lot of this information was talked about with kids, and hopefully then they can take it home and share it with their families, I think the more that just becomes a part of the world of students, then they can grow up. It doesn't make it so other.
Yeah.
It brings it.
Normalizes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Melanie, just want to say there's just a quick comment about how
Sure.
minimizing is it when a stranger makes an assumption about your sexuality?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it makes you feel less than.
Mhm.
Right, and really, and at the core, because a lot of how, and I know this was my experience, that a lot of how people define themselves as a person comes from how they define their sexuality. And to have that challenged or to have that minimized, it really offends your identity. And it's yeah, it
And I think
really
I'm going to guess
this big.
I'm going to go on a reach here and guess that this person who felt it was okay to approach you and talk to you like that would also be the type of person where if you challenge them on it, they would say, what's your problem?
I'd be the one with the
Can't you take a joke?
I'd be the one with
And
the bad
you
attitude.
have the problem and the bad attitude.
Chip on my
right?
shoulder. Yeah.
So when it comes to consent's not just about consent when it comes to sex. Consent also is revolves around boundaries as well,
Absolutely.
right? And consent is something that we need to have internally, so that self-talk, there needs to be consent in with that, and then consent with others, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So what about the myth that people with spinal cord injury are bad in bed, or they'll never be able to satisfy a partner?
Well, I had experience with this very early on in my very shortly after my accident.
How old were you?
I was 20 at the time, and I was still in the hospital, and I was being driven back to the hospital by a family member who told me flat out. I remember we were driving down the highway listening to Sue Johansson, and
Sex with Sue.
Sex with Sue. And this person said to me that I better get used to being alone because there's no way I'd ever be able to satisfy a partner. that there would be, that because I'm paralyzed and I can't get erections, then therefore I am unable to be a sexual partner.
Sounds like a truth bomb to me, what somebody thinks is being a truth bomb, right? They
Yeah.
just drop something down and then they walk away and don't realize that they've just, the damage that they've done.
And how this person actually thought they were doing me a favor
Right.
by saying that.
So regardless of disability, we can all experience self-doubt when it comes to sex and sexuality,
Right.
and lack confidence. But the myth of not being able to satisfy a partner and the careless things that people say, just, it just gives weight to those.
Well, for me, it
misconceptions,
reinforced everything. It reinforced the body image issues.
So nobody will be attracted to me.
That's right.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
reinforced my identity, myself, like I said before, like just how I viewed myself. I always, I was very into sports, and I was very physically active. And I rode for university, I cycled, and actually one of the parts of my body that I was happy with was my legs. And then when I lost that, and then not knowing that I had the ability to participate in sports and do all that stuff, and then questioning whether or not I'd be able to, have a partner again, be able to date, be able to do all those things. And to have just that one comment was enough to just really reinforce a lot of those insecurities that I had.
And if we can't see our own worth, then how do we allow other people to see?
Well, that's that
our
old
worth?
saying, you need to love yourself before other people can love you.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So built into this would be the notion of having to take what you can get,
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Because you feel like you have little to offer, and then how can you actually place any demands on what your expectations should be of a partner and what they bring to the table?
right. Well, when you have all those insecurities, and when I know myself, I really just thought I was destined for a life of loneliness, and being alone. So when somebody came along that seemed to, be even the slightest bit attracted to me, I latched on.
Yeah.
And I latched on and was not willing to let go. And despite the fact that I knew part of me knew that this was not a good relationship, that this person was not in it for the right reasons. And yet I abandoned all of those red flags.
Mhm.
I took all of those worries and concerns and shoved them under a carpet and said, I got to marry this person, because if I don't, I might not get anything else.
The damage of how we jam things down,
That's
isn't
right.
it? And it's the detrimental nature of fear and shame.
And I felt that way for 10 years after my injury. It
And
lasted.
That's the message given by family, friends, media, right?
Well,
About what's the norm and what's traditional.
Yep.
So again, it's that narrowing and limiting, which again is a hindrance to being fulfilled.
Yep.
You're always so worried about whether or not you're doing what you ought to, or you should, or do I look the way I'm supposed to, that you never feed yourself to actually have that feeling of fulfillment.
Yep.
Right? What about the myth that people with spinal cord injuries are sex deprived? What do they even mean?
Well, I think with that too, that it's kind of, it's on that spectrum or that continuum regarding, you can't get a partner, you'll never get a partner. But then there's the thought that, well, even if you are a sexual being and you have desire, if you arousal is still there, that there's no way to satisfy that.
Mhm.
That no one's going to be interested in you. So even if you are a sexual being, there's going to be no way for you to exercise that, because
There's no outlet.
there's no outlet, because
who
who is going to like you
do
for
that?
you?
So
Yeah.
that feeds into the views on able-bodied people like myself who are in an interabled relationship. The idea that there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
That I would settle for somebody with a disability.
Well, you're an angel,
or
you're doing
that
me a
I'm a
favor.
saint.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a saint, and I'm somehow like doing you a favor, and that you're lucky to have me, which you are, of course, but not for those
Not
reasons.
for those
right?
reasons, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm certainly lucky to have you.
And it's again just speaks to the ignorance, I think,
Yeah.
more than anything else.
How about the myth that sex is not enjoyable after spinal cord injury?
Well, that's again another thing, and again, it's a thing that I carried from my pre-injury beliefs that sex was all about your penis, and the orgasm was equated with ejaculation, and so therefore, if I can't feel those areas anymore, then how on earth can sex be enjoyable?
So for men, it would be erection. For
Erection.
women, it would be vaginal lubrication. So
Right.
if those things are absent, then
How can you possibly have a satisfying sex
Right.
life? Which is completely, yeah. And again, it took me a long time to figure this out. But I mean, your body is a miraculous thing, and where you've lost sensation, areas of your body that still do have sensation are going to become hypersensitive and can become erogenous zones. There's relocation of erogenous zones in your body. So parts of your body, like for me, nipples and ears, where before may have been somewhat sensitive, but now are very hypersensitive. And then through the process of knowing that those are sexualized areas, and that when they're stimulated, there is sexual arousal, that linked with psychologically linking it to sex, it becomes a new erogenous and very satisfying.
and you also had
So
some experiences as a teenager, right?
when I was late teens and into my early 20s, I was having problems with erectile dysfunction because of earlier things that happened in my life. So as a means of one, hiding the fact that that was the case, and two, wanting to still have sex and satisfy a partner, I practiced oral sex and a lot of other things, which really benefited me after my accident, but it still wasn't great after. It was years, because as I said, I very much settled with the first person that I became involved with, and it was a very non-intimate and very sexless relationship. So it wasn't until many years later when I had a boost of my confidence, and that I was able to explore that a little bit more. But I had to be comfortable with myself.
So was the fear earlier on that if you weren't able to have an erection and achieve vaginal penetration, then what partner would be interested?
Well, that's it.
The
So-
fear that,
Yes.
so even if you accepted yourself, would somebody accept?
That's
that.
right. Yeah. And that's the other end of it. I mean, it's all fine and well that I am comfortable with the fact that, intercourse becomes a secondary. I mean, it's still a possibility. And for some, it's still the main thing that they're interested in. But because for me, it was a secondary thing, would I be able to find a partner that would feel the same way?
Right.
So.
What about female genital functioning after a spinal cord injury?
Well, of course, I don't have experience with that personally, but
So I guess this would be a shout out.
yes,
Too.
again, for any women that want to again contact us with some of their personal experiences to help educate us, that would be great. But I do have a number of friends who are female who have spinal cord injury, and again, there was the exact same pressures, and to some extent even more, because when you look at the literature and the way it's even treated within hospitals, women after spinal cord injury get very little education when it comes to sexuality. I mean, there seems to be this misconception or myth out there too, that it's not as hard for women after a spinal cord injury, because after all you need to use is some lubricant and you'll be fine, which is not the case at all. I mean, I knew a woman who she still had some sensation deep in her vagina, and everybody thought she was the luckiest person and that she should feel lucky because she has that sensation that's in there. But she hated it because it hurt. And yet there was this, she and again, for years post-injury, had dealt with it and didn't say anything and put up with it and put up with this pain and this discomfort because it's what is supposed to be.
And it's unfortunate because again, it's about having a hard time communicating our needs to our nearest and dearest, right?
Yeah.
And again, that also talks about, speaks to consent.
Mhm.
What about the myth that if you have a spinal cord injury?
Melanie?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to read
Okay.
another comment while you're just on that last
Sure.
topic. So just the comment was, how often do we see a disabled woman being portrayed as desirable in the media?
Yeah, right. You
Mhm.
just no, and if it is, it's this sensational thing, and
Or it's
what
fetishized,
a
right?
big favor that this, that this magazine or this catalog
Yeah.
or whatever they did had someone in a wheelchair in it. That the same thing with you being a saint because you were someone in a wheelchair. But if somebody was gonna portray someone that way, it's
if we look at
somehow
what's
doing
in
them
the
a favor.
magazines, if we look at what's in the magazines, I mean, almost all of us are othered when we look at the images as to what is attractive in a male and what's attractive in a female. And then to put to be intersectional and have other layers on it. So not only are you not you don't have the face of what is supposed to be attractive in a female, you also have a disability, then that's like a double whammy.
Yeah, it sets women up for unachievable,
and, men and women.
expectations.
And then, again, it makes these arbitrary rules about what beauty is, what it means to be masculine or feminine, and it's just it's cutting us out from so many opportunities to have some really awesome connections.
Yeah,
right.
and sex being one of them.
Sex being one of them, for sure.
There's just two things I want to make sure that we get to, because we're going a little bit long here, and this is what I was not wanting to do. But I want to talk specifically about masturbation and about orgasm. Okay, right? Because there's the myth out there too that touching yourself is bad, and that's not just for people who have spinal cord injury, it's for everybody. I remember
the taboo of masturbation.
Masturbation.
Right. Okay.
So, because I remember when I was in grade 7 or grade 8, we had a doctor come in and give us a sex ed talk, and there was a question posed to him: is it normal to masturbate? And his comment was, "Well, yeah, if you're a moron." So I remember that, and that stuck with me. So the idea of exploring my own body was just so taboo. It was just something that was not.
You think about what damage that causes to put that taboo in place. If you look about, and especially for women, because we're not supposed to want to have sex, so you have young females who are figuring out their own bodies, and they're not supposed to want to have sex, so you're certainly not supposed to masturbate. And then what does that lead some of us into later with making maybe not great choices when it comes to sexual partners?
Yep.
Because we are not given permission to figure out what feels really good and true to us, and then demand that out of in a relationship. That this is that I respect myself, and you're damn well going to respect me too. Otherwise, forget it, because I can take care of myself. Right. So I think it goes for men too.
And after spinal cord injury, I mean, it's really, in terms of knowing your own body, it's important to take the time to explore what it is that feels good for you. And whether you do that yourself or you do that with a partner, there's a process called or an activity called body mapping, which I think is spectacular. I mean, it wasn't until I felt myself, my own personal experience, that I felt comfortable being able to explore my own body, that I was able to go through a process like this myself. But body mapping is it's going over your body and finding those erogenous zones, and also finding the places which don't want to be touched. So like you said, in terms of, this is where it works for me, and this is what I want to have happen, and knowing that and asserting that for yourself.
So I'm just gonna jump in just for a second. So if it's an interabled related, or it doesn't really matter, it can be something that the couple does together. For both couples, and
because whether you've got spinal cord injury or not,
because it could also end up opening up somebody who doesn't have the spinal cord injury to realize that there's a lot more to their body than just their penis or their vagina,
Right.
or, you know,
Yeah.
that there could be like what's wrong with the inner part of your arm and all of those other things that people can explore, right?
Yeah.
And again, you talked a little bit earlier too about equating orgasm and ejaculation as being the same thing when they're actually very separate. So if you take ejaculation out, you can still have the orgasm, right?
Yeah.
But there was also a point where the medical field called the orgasms that were experienced post-injury as phantom orgasms, right?
Yeah, like they somehow weren't real, or they were all psychosomatic. When a lot of research has been focusing on what's called the vagus nerve.
So this is more recent?
This is more recent. And the vagus nerve sits outside the spinal column. So even regardless of where your injury may be along the spinal cord, the vagus nerve is left intact. And a lot of the physiological responses to orgasm, they are now thinking follows the pathway of the vagus nerve. So it is very possible for people with complete spinal cord injuries, regardless of the level, to still experience orgasm.
So I think too, I'm going to ask you a question to share something with the group.
And then we want to open it up for conversation. So
yeah, hold on to it. We're okay.
okay, all right.
That sometimes we need to have or bring up personal things or talk about things and share things so that it doesn't become it takes away the taboo part of it, right?
Sure.
So if we look at some females growing up, that we have a lot of shame when it comes to our genitals, right? So and always wondering, are they right? You know, and it's like it's like somehow there's some ideal of what female genitalia is supposed to look like, and if we're outside of that we're less than, right? And I think the more that we can just talk about the variety of things and how variety is the spice of life, that the better it is. So I wonder if you would mind sharing with everybody what an orgasm is like for you.
Okay. It is different than it was before. Again, because it was so ejaculation centric. But now when you take that part out of it, the physiologic responses of goosebumps and sweating and flushing and all of that stuff still exists. It's still there, but it's more of a systemic feel, and it's more of an all over body feel. It still builds like an orgasm did before, but rather than it be just this one, forceful ejaculation and then it's over, it spreads through my whole body. And there's different types. There are some that are really fast and shocking, and other ones where the body just melts into it. But it feels much more like a connection with you. And it's again, it feels a lot more intimate, and it's a lot more emotional than what it used to be. So I often say, I only wish I knew this before, so I would have never left the bedroom. So
I think too that there's also where you've also used some of that to combat pain.
That's right. Actually, yes, because I have a lot of neurologic pain, a lot of burning sensation in my legs and in my groin. And when I have an orgasm, that flares up like that I get a jolt in that sensation, that burning sensation. So it's actually taken what used to be just an uncomfortable, painful experience, and I've associated it with orgasm, which makes it more pleasurable. So
now I will speed things up a bit. I'm sorry, guys. This is just, I love talking to this guy, so it's hard to stay on track sometimes. So how about the myth that masturbation is not sex? How do you feel about that?
it absolutely is. So there's the masturbation is sex with yourself, simply put.
And I guess too that there's also people who might still, even if there's no sensation, might still masturbate in a traditional way.
Oh, sure, because through fantasy is a huge thing too. So it's like the myth that people that have spinal cord injury don't like being touched where they can't feel their body.
Right.
No, I mean, I love watching your legs be over mine. I love watching our bodies mash together. It's just, again, that psychological, emotional, intimate piece.
And I know
The
from
connection.
from a partner point of view, like all of you is all of you.
Yeah.
So to be able to touch your feet or to touch your legs, it's very intimate. It's, I think, like, because of how we've communicated from the beginning of this relationship, it is the most intimate relationship I have ever experienced. And I think that stems from that communication, just makes everything.
Yeah, and you hit on the biggest thing right there is communication. The biggest thing is communicating with your partners, and right from the very beginning. So whether if you were in an intimate relationship, when you sustain the injury, communicate. Make sure that you're talking about this and not holding things back. If you're entering a new relationship, my suggestion is put it out there, lay it on the table, because you don't want to invest yourself emotionally and then just find out that the person's not willing to accept you for who you are.
And that kind of leads in a little bit to next week too. So we'll kind of,
So Melanie,
yeah.
sorry, got another question. So sorry to interrupt this awesome sharing, which nobody's interrupting. We welcome all your questions. I have a question about masturbation. Does people with SCI trigger complications while masturbating, such as autonomic dysreflexia?
And
that's what I found during, oh, sorry, well, it's just, so that's what I found during research, but not sure if that really happens. And if it happens, then how do you prevent complications while pleasuring yourself?
Yes, and that's something great, because that's something that we were also going to touch on is, and again, it's that communicating with yourself. You've got to know your own body. And yes, sex and stimulating those over sensitive parts of your body can definitely trigger autonomic dysreflexia. So, but with autonomic dysreflexia, once you know what's triggering it, you take that noxious stimuli away, and then the dysreflexia goes away, right? So it's a matter of very gently and gradually introducing yourself to exploring your body and finding out what works within a safe range.
So starting off with something a little bit more gentle. So maybe like a softer touch rather than going right for like a jackhammer sort of a thing, just to kind of see how far you can go before that's triggered.
That's right. And a lot of it's trial and error. But yes, and if anybody with an injury with T6 or higher, you do have to be careful about autonomic dysreflexia. So yeah, make it a slow process. And if you're at all comfortable with just exploring your body, it's always, if you could do it with a partner, then you have someone there in the event that something happens. But if you are by yourself, I can't say enough, just do it gradually. And as soon as you get any signs of AD, then stop. Especially with using, someone even said here too, be cautious using sex toys.
Yeah.
Because again, the intensity of a vibrator can be enough to send someone, because I myself, for autonomic dysreflexia, when I use, and I did this for fertility, for having my daughter, is I use the vibratory technique at home for ejaculation, and I got autonomic dysreflexia huge, and it hit me just like use it like a jackhammer.
Yeah.
And because this was back to before any of this stuff was known, this was back in 1998. And so, yes, be very, very cautious.
So myths and misconceptions have an impact on our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Can you give us an example of that?
Yes. For any of you that are familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's along those lines. So basically, everybody has an internal dialogue. Everybody talks to themselves and gives themselves message about themselves and the world around them. That will then influence your emotions, which then will then impact your behavior. So basically, it's as we said, getting over those sticky points. And
so an internal dialogue. Let's say the internal dialogue was, because I cannot get an erection, I can no longer have sex.
Okay, so yeah, if that's the internal message, then you're going to have feelings such as helplessness, anger, inadequacy, insecurities that, which may lead to depression and anxiety. And then you have those are going to affect your behavior. So you may have avoidance behaviors. People are going to avoid, well, like we said about autonomic dysreflexia, right? So if the fear is I'm automatically going to have autonomic dysreflexia, there's nothing I can do about it, but the behavior will then be an avoidance thing, right, as opposed to gradually introducing yourself softly and gently and one thing at a time, so that if it triggers it, you can take it away and you know what it is that's causing it. It doesn't mean that you don't have, that you can't do it at all, just you may have to take your time. You have to go a little bit slower. So a lot of it, again, it's a cyclical thing. Okay,
so I think that's where we're going to start our session next week on communication. We'll kind of come back to those to the cognitive behavioral therapy model.
Yeah, and it's important that too, for those of you that want to come back for the communication one, when we talk about communication, we don't just mean with other people. We also mean with yourself. So, which is a very important component.
So if there's any questions in the chat that we haven't addressed, Julie, or if anybody has a question, if they want to be unmuted to ask a question, or we can go to the question that we posed at the beginning, which is, have you had an experience where you were treated differently regarding sex or sexuality because you have an SCI or because you're somebody who is with somebody with an SCI?
So as far as the chat box, I think we got through all the questions. There was just one last comment saying, thank you so much. This is really helpful.
So glad. We do this anytime, for sure.
Okay, so we just got another one. I worry about the onset of pain or a seizure, so I don't even connect.
You want to speak to that?
Do you have a spinal cord injury, or is there like epilepsy, or is there some cognitive issues as well, or brain related issues? Like, was there for that person? Because in terms of seizure, I'm not 100% familiar with, or I don't know what you mean, but I mean, because again, it would be, from my understanding, like autonomic dysreflexia, would be to do things gradually, but we need to know more about what causes your seizures. To neurologic injury. Okay, well, that's what I would recommend you do then. Again, when we say about communication, we're also with your medical experts too. I would talk to your
physiatrist.
Nerve injury to C4, C5. Okay. Yeah, I would talk to your physiatrist to see if there is the possibility that, because you don't want to be messing around with seizures. So I would recommend that you talk to your physiatrist to see if that kind of stimulation.
Do they feel,
yeah, do you feel comfortable talking to your physiatrist?
Huh.
Oh, geez. Well, that's, do you have?
Sorry, Wallace, I just want to say they've said I've been largely ignored.
Yes,
just not sure if everyone's looking in the chat.
Yeah, which is too much the case, where you've got these, healthcare professionals that will not address the issue or the topic of sexuality, sex and intimacy.
There's got to be somebody else in the medical field, like another offshoot to
that.
that.
I'm wondering if, like, an OT, do you have any OTs that you
or would
have?
Somebody at SCIO, Julie, would there be resources through your organization where somebody could connect them with somebody who might have medical knowledge?
Yeah.
Lubna, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. We do not have any medical like experts on our roster, we just have like peer-based information, right? And
Yeah.
Right.
information is not is lived experience. It is
Right.
never,
Yeah.
it's never
Absolutely.
medical knowledge or even like, you know, counseling or support in that condition. But Francis, I don't know which which part of the province you are in. One of the things you could do is you could connect. You are in Toronto.
Toronto.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. So Tracy Palmer, who used to be the sex therapist
Okay.
in Ottawa, has given in some information. And Tracy, thank you so much. So her advice is don't wait for medical profession to bring it up. If the psychiatrist won't help you, try the neurologist. And
Mhm.
from personal experience, self-advocacy goes a very long way.
Oh, absolutely.
And I
Yeah,
think
that's
too,
what I was
I
asking about
wonder,
if there was an OT.
but
Because
from the
there's-
peer point of view, I mean, you could access peer support to find out anybody peers who do have support from their physiatrist, and is there
Right.
a
Right.
way to make connections through peers to get to a medical professional who will take take them seriously
Yeah.
and listen
Cool.
to what they have to say.
Yeah, so what I could do is Francis, I'm going to put my email address in the chat box because I am in Toronto and I don't see any other of my Toronto crew here. Get in touch with me, and what we can do is we can find out, you know, how we can support you. If there is someone that we can get you in touch with to help you. One of the regional support services coordinators has a really good idea. There is the urology clinic at Lyndhurst, and they do
Yeah, I saw
address sexual functioning. So, Francis, why don't we do one thing is let's see if we can either speak to. Do you go to the Robson Clinic in Toronto? In any case, we can take it offline, and please connect with me on my email address and we'll take it from there.
Good.
Good. Thank you both, Tracy and Sherry, for your tips. They're really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. For knowing what's available in Toronto. That's great.
Is there anyone else that has any? Oh, we've got another thing in the chat box. Can I quote some of the advices from this meeting in my research project? I will make sure to give credits.
I'm
fine with that. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I know that I think this video will be posted on the SCIO website, and we'll also post it on our website, T6 Talk, as well. So, so that would certainly be available for people to look at, or for sure.
Okay.
Does anybody have any comments on the question about their own personal experience about being treated differently?
Yeah. Okay.
I don't see
I would also please invite people to contact us for your feedback on the presentation.
Yeah.
We would love to have or to hear from people regarding whether or not this was helpful. We chose to do more of a conversation style presentation to the information rather than just throw a PowerPoint presentation up on the screen like so many times. You know, you've sat through so many of those.
Are great for certain information.
Yeah,
but we kind of wanted to recreate how we came up with this in the beginning, which is, you know, we would go for a drive and find a nice place to park, and we just hit record on one of our phones, and we would just talk.
Yeah.
And very informative. Good. Yeah. It's just, I don't know, when you have open, clear communication.
Yeah.
It's I don't want to say that it's easy, but it
makes it easier.
I never get sick of talking other than when I don't want to hear him talk.
Yeah. We've got a sign, we've got a note that's up on a shelf in the kitchen that says Scotch tape, and it says for those shh moments.
Yeah.
So that's when she wants to take my mouth shut.
I put a piece of duct tape on the back of his chair just so it's handy, just in case, because he can be,
I can be
Very,
wordy.
very chatty, which
Yes.
is awesome.
Yeah. But the thing is too, with the topic of spinal cord injury and intimacy, it's so huge. Like for us to try to find a way to narrow it down to 3 different subject headings was very difficult. So again, feedback from people in terms of other things that they'd like to hear about. That's important too, because I mean, we're looking at the 3. We're looking at the myths and misconceptions in terms of how that helps you develop yourself, the communication, and then we're going to talk about sex. So let us know if there's other things that you,
because then after these 3, you know, if it means we come back and do another 3 sessions, but we, you know, change up what the content is, then we're
we
happy
won't know
to,
that
happy
unless
to do
people
that.
tell us.
Yeah, people
So.
need to,
And if you also thought it sucked balls, you can actually say that on the website too.
So we got a couple good comments. Very informative and great way to share information. Excuse me. Love how you two bounce so easily off one another. Thank you.
We had pages of notes, and I think we covered everything on there, but nowhere near in the order was on the pages. We were just all over the place.
That's okay. Your presentation validates the teaching and information. So this is from Tracy. Your presentation validates the teaching and information I share with persons, couples with SCI. I encourage communication before, during, and after intimacy. And then another comment.
Oh, thanks, Phil.
Brilliant job together and authentic. Very informative presentation. Some of this information we're lacking in present researches. Thank you. Oh, I have a question to Wallace. Have you ever had a relationship with someone with an SCI?
No, actually, I haven't. And I would say we've talked about this, and there was the opportunity when I was first hurt with somebody who I was in the hospital with that I liked a lot, and I was just so wrapped up in my fears of what I was incapable of doing that I thought, well, 1 spinal cord injury is hard enough, maybe having 2 would be even harder. And looking back now in retrospect, it was a very harmful way for me to think, because I was looking at all of what I could no longer do. And if I can no longer do this and she can no longer do that, then how could we possibly have a successful, intimate relationship?
So what's your perspective on that now?
My perspective on that now is that if I were, again, like that research study I quoted before that says the sooner that you kind of let go of all of that stuff and hold on to the possibility and explore what options are out there, if I had that mindset then yes, it would have been something that I would have, you know, likely pursued. But it wasn't. Again, I had too much of that stuff that I carried with me from pre-injury that was too hard. So no, but there's a part of me that thinks it would have happened if I would have, you know, if I would have known then what I know now, you know, that same old thing. If I was, you know, it would have been different. So
hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah.
And looks like one last comment here. I've learned more tonight than living with an SCI in 25 years. I'm so very grateful to you guys. This has been so helpful. After 35 years of marriage is fantastic. I'm so glad I'm friends with you guys.
Yes, that's Mr. Phil there.
Oh.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. That's awesome.
So that's it for the chat box again. Is there anyone that's got any last questions or comments? I know we're at the kind of just over 8:30 point, but.
And if you want to just reach out and if you wanted to send us an email through the website, we would love to hear from you.
We'll answer any questions.
Not everybody wants to sit in front of a camera and is comfortable talking like that. So in any way that you want to communicate with us, please just reach out. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Right.
So I did put your website in the chat box, but if anyone didn't catch it, you've got my email from the like the RSVP and reminders. So feel free to email me if you weren't able to get the website down, and I'd be more than happy to pass that along to anyone as well.
And so that people know, the basis of our website is just to keep communication open and going within the spinal cord injury community. So it's just learning from each other and sharing resources and personal experiences and that kind of stuff.
So we're always looking for people to, if you say, even if it's a recipe, and you say, you know what, this recipe is really great, you know, whatever it might be that you want to share that we can put on the site would be just terrific. And we also want to make sure we stop and say a big thank you to SCIO for giving this opportunity, to certainly to Lubna and Julie, to you. Thank you so much for believing in us and
having a shared appreciation for the subject matter, because it is something that it's crazy. I started talking about sexuality and spinal cord injury back in the mid 90s. I was giving presentations and lectures and stuff, and to think that we're not all that much further forward right now than what we were.
Well, as a society in general, how far are we in being able to talk about?
Yeah, how taboo it is still, and how much information is out there, but how little of it is shared. And
Well, I want to say a big thank you to the two of you, because the openness and the honesty and just the conversation style has been awesome. And it's, you know, lived experience that you're sharing, and that's, you know, what our peer program is all about. And I just think it's awesome that we've got this platform now for you guys to be able to do this. And the fact that we're doing a 3-part series, you know, you can talk about a lot of things in an hour as opposed to trying to squish it all in to one presentation. So for any of you that don't that haven't registered for the next 2 series and you are interested, please go to our website at sciontario.org, and you can register there for the next, either the next one, which is next Wednesday, and then the third one is June the 2nd, same time, 7:30 to 8:30.
And we hope the timing too kind of works.
Great.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yep.
So I just need to do a quick shout out to our sponsors, our provincial partner, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and Hollisters, our provincial bowel and bladder, as well as vehicle modification sponsors, and also our regional sponsors, which is Westminster Foundation and Economic Insurance. So thank you all again for participating, and
thanks for
coming
spending your evening with us.
Thank you very much, guys.
We might see some of you next week.
Oh, there's Sherry. I know Sherry Roberts. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Sherry Upper and Sherry Roberts. There were 2 of them. So, I know them both.
Thanks so much for the wonderful presentation. It was fantastic.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a great night. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Talk to you soon, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night.